So the point isn't to be perfect. The point is to be committed and to stay focused on Jesus, to step out in faith and to see where he meets you, where he takes you, and how he works through you. I am so excited to share a word of hope and encouragement with you today. You know, our ultimate goals in this life are actually to become more like Jesus and to help others become like him as well. It's what Jesus meant when he said, "Go and make disciples of all nations." But here's the thing, you and I will never be able to go if our priority isn't to first keep our eyes on Jesus. In our world and culture, it's all too easy to get our eyes on people, on status, on success, and all kinds of different stuff. Now, in doing this, we can measure ourselves by all the wrong things instead of the ultimate prize, which is Jesus and Jesus alone. Now, I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I had happen in my life what really became a perfect storm. Now, I was on a boat and I was celebrating my 50th birthday with friends and family, and when I came home, I had 26 missed calls from my brother to tell me that that night my mum had passed away. I mean, as you can imagine, that was just whiplash and shocking. Now, just a few months after that, my sister-in-law, who was my age, my brother's wife, she passed away. Then one of Nick's sisters died, and his brother-in-law. So there was a lot of back and forth for going back to Australia for funerals. And then there was our work with A21 and the traveling around the world and organizing and multitasking. And then there was, the very real healing and emotional work I needed to go through after suffering so much loss. But on top of it all, I had just a personal betrayal in a friendship that just knocked me right out. It was kind of like the final straw. And, I remember one night in particular, Nick and I were just in bed, and he was watching this show about this intense training that the Navy SEALs go through. And there was this thing, the program he was watching was all about Hell Week. And let me tell you, that's what it exactly looked like. I mean, they break you down. You're pushed to the absolute limit physically, mentally, emotionally. And the whole goal is to break you down so you can ring a bell and basically drop out of the program. And so it just seemed like really hard to someone like me. And, as all this was happening, I realized that those last few months of my life, relationally, emotionally, I felt like I'd gone through my own personal kind of hell week. I had been through so much betrayal and hurt and disillusionment and loss, and I just felt like I'd been broken down on every front. And I remember just crying, and I was just so heartbroken. And what followed that eye-opening moment was a lot of heart work and recommitment to healing and wholeness and doing ultimately what God had called me to do. But I share that story with you today because I want you to know that what will ultimately help us to not only endure in this life, but to overcome the obstacles, the hurdles, the challenges, the pain, the suffering, the disappointment, the discouragement, the disillusionment, is simply keeping our eyes on Jesus. Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 to 14, "Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus." I find it so interesting that Paul uses the word strain, because to strain for something isn't a fun experience. It requires a lot of effort. It requires persistence. It requires a lot of commitment. But that's the kind of life that you and I are called to. The Apostle Paul also writes in Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, "Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." What an incredible promise this is. What we think about can and will impact our peace. It will impact our purpose. It will impact our faith. The question is, what are we thinking about day in and day out? What are we focusing on? What are we straining towards, whether consciously or unconsciously? We live in an age where there are a multitude of options. We can spend hours a day looking at our phones, looking at our email, looking at how many likes we get and how many people are sharing our posts, looking at the news and live streaming shows. And if we don't intentionally put our phones down, we might never, ever stop. The Apostle Paul might not have had a clue what was coming in our generation, but he knowingly wrote for us to keep our thoughts, our focus, and our eyes on Jesus. Because of this, it's so important we train our eyes to look away from everything else, because we live in an age when technology has the power to distract us more than ever. Now, don't get me wrong. I couldn't do all that I do without technology. It's how I communicate most of the time with my phone and our global team. Jumping on Zoom for a meeting on my laptop is how we stay connected. And when Nick and I travel, we text or FaceTime with our girls as much as possible. But despite how much we rely on technology to do all that God has called us to do, we can't let it consume so much of us that we forget to look to Jesus most of all. So this Christian life, it's undoubtedly a journey of stepping out of our comfort zone and following Jesus. It's a faith adventure. It's a surrendered life of putting everything we are into the hands of a God who loves us unconditionally. He is the reason we're started. He is the reason we keep going. He is the reason we get back up. Jesus is the reason we do not stop. So if where you've been looking has diverted you away from all that God has created you to be, or from all He's called you to do, let me encourage you to realign your focus today. It is not too late to get your focus back. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in 1 Samuel chapter 14. King Saul's son Jonathan says to his armor bearer in verse 6, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." These words, "it may be," are just awesome. Perhaps Jonathan wasn't certain God would be with him. Still, he took a risk, and Israel's enemies, the Philistines, were soundly defeated as a result of that. So I hope you and I will follow Jonathan's example. Let's not wait for things to be perfect before we make a move. Let's not be so concerned with stepping outside the will of God that we don't take a step at all. Listen, God is big. He's a big God. He isn't about to let you get off course. If your heart's pursuing Him, you can be sure He's with you in every step you take. And even if you make a mistake, God can redirect you. So the point isn't to be perfect. The point is to be committed and to stay focused on Jesus, to step out in faith and to see where He meets you, where He takes you, and how He works through you. So I'd love to encourage you in this truth further, because again, I know how hard it is to do that. It's why I've written a brand new devotional called You're Not Finished Yet. This devotional is filled with 100 devotions to help you to keep your eyes on Jesus when you cannot see that finish line. You know, I believe that God is not finished with any of us yet. If you are still breathing, if there is still blood pumping through your arteries and veins, if your heart is still pumping, God has a plan and God has a purpose. Your greatest days are ahead of you and not behind you. Your mistakes, your failures do not have to limit you. They do not define you. Your history doesn't define you. Who Jesus says you are, that's who defines you. And He's got a plan for you, and He's able to work all things together for your good and for His glory. And so don't quit, don't stop, don't get stuck in the middle. Just don't get discouraged when you're in the middle. Don't get disappointed or so disillusioned that you quit. You are not finished yet. Your greatest days are ahead of you. So you can order your copy of my brand new devotional, You're Not Finished Yet, by clicking this link right here. So I love you guys, and I hope you have an awesome day. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments, and if you feel led, please share this video with a friend who needs to see it. Thanks so much for watching.